Welcome to our class on Chassidus. We're going to be learning a beautiful Chassidic discourse from the Rebbe. The name of the Chassidic discourse is called Na'ul. The Rebbe said this Chassidic discourse in Shabbos Parshas Tazriya-מצורע. That year was the third day of the month of Eir, in the year t'shm Mem Zayin, 38 years ago. The Rebbe went on to certify and edit this Chassidic discourse in honor of the second day of the month of Eir, in the year t'shm Nun, 35 years ago. So again, the Chassidic discourse is based on a verse in Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs from King Solomon, where it says, Na'ul Ahoti Kala, Gal Na'ul Mayan Chasam, which basically means the garden is totally closed off. My sister, my bride, the stream of water is totally locked, and the reservoir of water that's flowing is totally sealed off. And again, there's a lot of commentaries as natural in all the prophets and the writings, but we're going to focus on the way the Rebbe explains this verse. So the Rebbe brings that the Rebbe Maharash, which is the fourth Chabad Rebbe, who is celebrating his birthday on the second day of Iyyar, in a Chassidic discourse of Parshas Tazriya-מצורע, which is a continuation of a Chassidic discourse, a famous Chassidic discourse in the Rebbe Maharash, Matzah Zu of the year Taf Reish Mem. He brings the translation of the Targum, because again, there's a lot of translations. So the Targum says as follows: just like in the Garden of Eden is totally closed off, and you can't just come in there. Who comes into the Garden of Eden? Tzaddikim, righteous people. So the same thing also in the parable is that the Jewish people, they close off their doors to Hashem, and it's exclusively for Hashem. Our relationship is only with Hashem. That's what he brings from the Rebbe Maharash brings from the Targum, and he explains over there that what is a gan? So gan literally is a garden, but what does it mean spiritually? Gan is the level of tainug, pleasure. And what does it mean that gan na'ul, that the garden, which we're saying now, where he's translating as pleasure, is closed off, that the pleasure that we have is only with Hashem. And like the expression is, Ve'imcha loicha fatzti, the only one that I want is Hashem. And there's to point out that in the Chassidic discourse before that, he also brings gan na'ul with another insight. What is gan na'ul? It's closed off. It's referring to sur merah, not doing anything negative. So the Rebbe says sur merah, when you're not doing anything negative, that's factual. You're not doing anything negative. Here he's talking a whole different level. It's referring to the idea of pleasure. But the revolutionary idea in this Chassidic discourse, based on the Targum, is that when it says gan na'ul, not like he explains differently where it's just sur merah, not doing evil, but even the deepest pleasures we have is only in Hashem and with Hashem. Now, in there's another commentary on this verse in the prophets called the Metzudas David, which is one of the classical commentaries on the prophets. So on this verse he explains that the Jewish people are like a closed off garden, because the only one that can come in is the owner of the garden. That's what he gives it. That's the Metzudas David's explanation. So we have to understand this idea that the garden is pleasure is also on a physical level. So therefore, in the parable that the garden is closed off, and we're saying that basically that they're closing off their relationship, and the only relationship we have is a pleasure relationship with Hashem. So that's obvious, because garden is pleasure. So what is the Rebbe Maharash, so to speak, adding by saying that they close it off, and the garden and the garden is closed off? He connects it to the idea of what? Of the Garden of Eden. And especially that when he say that the garden is closed off literally, like the simple translation of, or the explanation of the Metzudas David, is seemingly more, it flows more with the parable that he's trying to bring out. Why? Because since the garden is closed off, is referring to the pleasure that the Jewish people have. And what does it mean when it's closed off? That we're closing off our pleasure, we're not having any pleasure from the physical world. So seemingly the parable it applies to a regular garden. So why does the Targum specifically say that gan na'ul is referring to the Garden of Eden, which obviously is referring to a deep level of pleasure in Hashem, but that's a natural pleasure of Hashem. Here the point is that even though we're in this world and there's places to get lost with our pleasure, but no, we're being focused on Hashem. So again, back to the question, why is he bringing the concept of the Garden of Eden when that's exclusively referring to the pleasure of Hashem? First of all, understand this based on what's explained in the Chassidic discourse, that when he says Gan Na'ul, the garden is closed off. It's just like the concept of when someone gets married, the idea of Kiddushin, where you become sanctified to somebody. And he explains over there, based on what it's known, where it says, we say Kadshenu b'mitzvosecha, we say Hashem, sanctify us what? With your mitzvot. But then when it comes to Torah, it says, saying Chalkenu, give us a part in the Torah. So he explains, what is Kadshenu mitzvosecha? We should be sanctified. That's the expression of Kiddushin, of marriage. In other words, what's the first stage in a marriage? The first stage in the marriage is Kiddushin. What does Kiddushin mean? It was something that's set aside and something that's dedicated. In other words, that basically the woman is saying that she's becoming mikudesh. She's getting ready, and she's unifying herself to her husband. And by making that commitment, now no one else can take her. That's kadshenu. That's the first concept. The first level of marriage is where basically you're committed to this person, and therefore obviously no one else. Then when it says, and that's the connection, Kadshenu mitzvosecha, through the mitzvahs we become Kadesh to Hashem. Then it says, V'sein chalkeinu b'soresecha, that's already the deeper level. That's the next level in the marriage, which is basically the actual nisuyin, the actual marriage. And what does that mean? That's when you connect on an internal level, up to the point the person draws within him the relationship, and it becomes chalkeinu. It becomes one. And that's why it says, Kadshenu b'mitzvosecha. When it comes to mitzvah, it says kedusha, which is the first phase, and when it comes to Torah, it says the same chalkenu, because when a person does a mitzvah, the energy you bring down is makif. It hovers over. Every mitzvah brings in a makif energy, and the effect that it has on the person is that does the mitzvah is that basically by bringing that energy, you're disconnecting from any pleasure and in the world and any bad attribute. Just like, for example, the first phase of a marriage, which is Kiddushin. And thus when a woman, so to speak, gets mikudesh to her husband, what's the main point in the first phase of the relationship, of the engagement, is now you're not available to anyone else. And afterwards, you're able to go ahead and internalize the Torah. After you do the mitzvahs part, where you're disconnecting from the world, you're disconnecting from pleasure in the world. Now you can connect to Hashem through Torah, like it says that the Torah is in my innards, which that's the next level of the marriage. We have two phases. We have Kiddushin and Nisuyin, which means, so to speak, where you're committing to this person and obviously no one else, and that's like the mitzvah, which brings in the makav energy. And then you have the Nisuyin, which is the actual relationship, and that is Torah, where it becomes internalized. And Rabbi says he'd like to add that the comparison of mitzvahs and Torah to engagement and marriage is in two areas. One is in the way it flows, the energy flows down. In other words, the energy that flows by doing a mitzvah. In the person that's doing the mitzvah, so we said before, when you do a mitzvah, basically the energy comes down in a makif way, it hovers over, which is called the engagement, and then by learning Torah, it becomes internalized. So that's the first difference. But also in the energy itself that flows down. Why is that? Because when the energy that flows through learning Torah is done more in an internal way, much more than mitzvahs, up to the point that in Kabbalah it's called the mitzvahs is the level of achirayim, and so to speak, it's from the back. Versus Torah, it's a face-to-face relationship. So therefore, that's why Torah is compared to the real marriage, where basically there's a physical connection between the husband and the wife. It's literally a physical connection, and the Rebbe said you can say. This is also hinted into the verse in the expression where it says "V'sein chelkeinu b'soresecha." We should have a part in the Torah. In other words, when it says chelkeinu, a part, there's two components. One is that the Torah becomes our part. When we learn Torah, becomes our part, and also it's the part of Hashem. And we know when you touch a part of something, you have the whole thing. So the Torah takes literally a part of Hashem, becomes, so to speak, part one with us. And Rabbi says he'd like to add. That Kadshenu mitzvosecha. Now, what comes first? Kadshenu mitzvosecha becomes sanctified to the mitzvahs, which is basically the makav energy, and that comes as an introduction to v'sein chalkeinu b'soresecha, where afterwards it's internalized. So you can say, and that's the reason why that before the Jewish people left Egypt. So what was the first mitzvah we received in Egypt? Parsha Chodesh. establishing the calendar. What's the idea of establishing the calendar? There's a lot of mitzvahs that are associated with it, which applies for generations, and it's actually considered one of the mitzvahs of a Chodesh Lachem. Why is that? Because when the Jewish people left Egypt, even though we didn't reach Mount Sinai yet to receive the Torah, but the process of receiving the Torah started as soon as we left Egypt. So therefore, before we left Egypt, we were commanded with many mitzvahs, and as that was an introduction from Mount Torah that started when we left Egypt, and afterwards, when we left Egypt, God gave us the 10 commandments that we received in Mara on the way, which was basically a preparation for receiving the Torah literally. And generally, you can say that this is what the Torah starts with Bereshis. In the beginning, God created heaven and the world. Why doesn't it start with that? Why doesn't it start with the first mitzvah? Because Hashem wanted to tell us that Hashem created the world, and Hashem basically chose who He wants to give it to, and by making that as an introduction to the whole Torah, because basically most of the mitzvahs are dependent on the land, which obviously we received as an inheritance from Hashem. And you can say this is also the reason that before the holiday Shavuot, what's holiday Shavuot? What holiday to receive the Torah? There's certain mitzvahs that come beforehand. For example, you have the mitzvah of Passover that comes before Shavuot, and the mitzvah of counting the Eimer every day. And it's just like every single day, a person becomes a new person. But when do you learn Torah? Only after you do the mitzvahs. Every single day, so to speak, it starts over again. But you don't just get up and start learning Torah. There's mitzvahs that happen first. First you say Shema, you put on tefillin, if it's during the week, you pray, etc. And so that's every single day. The same thing also in the times of the year, that the holiday Pesach every year, which that's when the Jewish people are born, it comes after certain mitzvahs that apply in that time. For example, you have the mitzvah of Passover, and then you come to the level of receiving the Torah. And he continues on the Chassidic discourse to explain. Just like when there's a marriage between a man and a woman, in a literal level, so what happens is in order for the marriage to take place, the man has to give her something. Whether it's something worth a penny or something worth a penny, etc. And what's the idea? The money that he gives her for the marriage has to be something that she can buy to give herself energy. In Hebrew, it's called chayi nafsha, something that she can sustain herself. So the same thing also with Hashem. That Hashem says, that when a person goes ahead and does a mitzvah, literally energy comes within us for the person that does the mitzvah. And like it says clearly in the Torah, a person should do the mitzvahs. Why do you should live from them? The purpose of every mitzvah is that we should literally receive life force energy. Now, even though we know mitzvahs is the will of Hashem, and mitzvahs we know what's the will. Will is makif. It's from keter. It's the high level that's makif. And makif we know is totally like in the level of kadosh. It's holier and it's disconnected from the world. But the fact is, even though that's true, but from there comes in energy into the human being that does the mitzvahs in a way of a chayis pnimi and internal energy. And like it's understood that the light that comes into a human being by doing a mitzvah, not only in thought or in speech or in action, but literally into the emotions and into our will and into the pleasure. The will and pleasure referring to obviously keter. And like we explained before from the Chassidic discourse, that when a person does a mitzvah, you become literally disconnected from all the pleasures in the world and from all the negative behaviors. And what we want is we want to be totally connected to Hashem, and the only pleasure we want is from Hashem Himself. But this is only a preparation in the external part of our heart. But it's not internalized. And that's why we're considered just engaged. That's the first level. And based on this, Rabbi explains, he'd like to explain why the Targum says that Gan No'ol, we started the Chassidic discourse explaining, is referring to the Garden of Eden. And the only one can come in there is what? Is the souls of the righteous people. And because the idea of that we close off any connection to anything in the world, and we want to be connected exclusively to Hashem. It means all our pleasure should be just in godliness. How do we do that? That's by initially bringing in the energy that comes through doing a mitzvah. And that's why he gives the parable of Garden of Eden, which is basically referring to the deep godly pleasure on high that comes in, and through that we're basically dedicated to internalize that. And as you can say, this is why he brings in the Chassidic discourse in the beginning the explanation of the Targum, because this explanation is a foundation what he explains in the Chassidic discourse, that they basically are connecting specifically to Hashem, which is connected to the idea of Katshenu b'mitzvosecha, we're sanctified to the mitzvah, and that's the connection between the two. And to go even deeper, Rabbi says, you're going to say, based on with an introduction of the explanation that he goes at length and he explains in the Chassidic discourse, where it says, "V'sein chelkeinu b'sarasecha," give us a part in your Torah, which Torah we said already, that's already the marriage, nisuyin. So he says, seemingly, he's explaining in that Chassidic discourse that Gan Noel is really, he's focusing more on the part of Katshenu Mitzvosecha, sanctifies with the mitzvah, which is the first level. So why is he explaining the second part of Sein Chalkeinu B'Sarasecha, which is already the marriage? It says, on a simple level, you can say that this that he explains over here, the second part of a Sein Chalkeinu B'Sarasecha, it affects the whole idea of Gan Noel in the continuation of the word of the verse. Why? Because the Medrash says, Gan Noel, that the garden is closed off. What is that referring to? A woman that never had intimacy, she's totally a virgin. Gal Noel is referring to those that already had intimacy. And the Rabbi the ''tשמ explains that the Gan Noel, what does it mean that woman never had intimacy? That's someone that's basically engaged. And Gal Noel is what? Someone that's already married. So Rabbi said he'd like to connect this insight of the ''tשמ that Gal Noel is together with the verse that says Gal Einai Va'abita Niflois B'Torasecha, that I'm going to look at the wonders of your Torah. Why? Because the main marriage is going to be when in the future when Mashiach comes. Because why is that? We have Torah now because then we're going to have the real revelation, the revelation of the Kabbalah and mysticism. We have it now, but it's not totally fully revealed. Now, but nevertheless, since in this Chassidic discourse, which is basically a continuation of the Chassidic discourse before of Matzazu, he speaks only about the level of Gan Noel, and the explanation of Gal Noel that he starts afterwards. So therefore you can say that this is what he explains in the Chassidic discourse, because through that we'll understand deeper the idea of Gan Noel. And what does that mean? He explains like this. Through the fact that we're going to do the work of Gan Noel, which basically is the first part, Katshenu Mitzvosecha, we're engaged to Hashem, which basically through the mitzvahs are drawing down the energy, and basically we're disconnecting from anything from the world, and we're committed totally to Hashem. Through doing our first part, you come to the second part of Sein Chalkeinu B'Sarasecha, which means we internalize and we get internally connected. Because what happens is, the energy that's drawn down through doing a mitzvah, and through that we become sanctified to Hashem, it's in a way that gives us internal energy. And this internal energy gets revealed in and through the marriage of a Sein Chalkeinu B'Sarasecha. So the Rebbe explains, based on this we can say, what does it mean Gan Noel and Gal Noel? Because Gan Noel is basically the first part, referring to the work of doing the mitzvahs. And Gal Noel is referring to learning Torah. And especially, more important, not only learning Torah, learning the internal part, chassidus, mysticism, etc. And these two different avodas, of one of doing the mitzvahs, which basically creates the makav energy, and that's the kedushin, the sanctification, and then afterwards learning Torah, which creates the pnimi energy, which is basically the culmination of the marriage. Both of these have to be done in the way of since we're dealing with the Rabbi Marash, his birthday is the second day of the year. Lechatchila ariba means to begin with you have to go over the top, and like that's the instruction of the Rabbi Marash. And the same thing also in the idea of Yelchu Michaya Lachol, to go from one level to the next. The level of engagement, which is Gan Noel, the first level, to the next level of marriage, Gal Noel, that when you go from one level to the next, it should be done not just in one step after the step, but it should be done over the top. And when a person does the level of a Yisrus L'Tat, means you do your part, then Hashem showers you with great blessings. So what will happen is, when you do your part, in a way of L'Chatchila Riber, the energy that will flow down, and the revelation, by doing this work, in a way of over the top, even in reference to the L'Chatchila of the person's work, that besides the fact that when a person goes ahead and does his part in a way that you put your effort in, then you will find tremendous results, because the fact is, the reward you get is much greater than the effort you put in. Because the fact is, we know, Metzia, when someone finds something, it comes automatic. You just find it. And the finding should also be done in the way of L'Chatchila Rebbe, it should be also over the top. Rebbe finished off and he says, it should be the will of Hashem, that as we speak about these ideas, and especially about this type of work, bringing down the energy and then internalizing it, but doing it in the way of the l'chatchila Rebbe off the charts. We're going to merit very, very soon for the ultimate redemption. And then we're going to have the completion of Kadshenu b'mitzvosecha. We're going to be sanctified through the mitzvahs. And we're going to have our part through Torah. And we're going to have, what does that mean? We're going to have the completion of the mitzvahs. And over there we're going to do k'mitzvahs ritzoynecha, not just the mitzvah, we're going to do like the way Hashem wants us to do the mitzvah. And we're going to have the completion of Torah, because it says when Mashiach comes, we're going to have Torah Chadash, a new Torah is going to come out from Hashem. And all this is going to happen, and Hashem is not going to hold back even like the blink of an eye. And all this is going to happen in a way of l'chatchila, a river over the top, that Hashem is not going to hold us back even for the blink of an eye, and it's going to happen literally right here, right now. So here's another beautiful Chassidic discourse from the Rebbe. Let's hope and pray, like the Rebbe finishes off, that Hashem is going to bring the Geula, and next class will be in Yerushalayim, Eir HaKodesh. Have a great and blessed week. Shavua Tov.